Hey, it's Soul with another video, and today we're going over the different abilities and passives available in the Legion Remix, talk about how the customization works, and give some feedback because some of them might kind of suck. This feedback is given as is to the best of my understanding, and will come from the point of view of someone most interested in running content solo and seeks out that self-sustaining god mode kind of player fantasy. So I apologize in advance, this video is going to be full of information, but it's going to fall short of working as if like we could use it as a guide. So please like this video if it is useful though, subscribe for more WoW coverage, and catch me where I'm live. In its current iteration, the start of the Legion Remix is a bit slow. You get your weapon, you get a power to speed up your cooldowns by a factor of 10, but you're also level 10, so who cares about what that power does, right? I do hope this power is given some actual teeth, so it feels like a useful button to press the moment you get it. Skipping ahead though, it's around level 20 when you're most likely to get enough infinite power to progress down this tree, where you pick up lots of spiffy passives that do all sorts of useful stuff like make your first hit stronger, makes you immune to fall damage, and so on and so forth. When first progressing, you don't have to fill out this entire whole side of the tree, you can mostly take a direct path towards the first artifact weapon ability of your choice, and then fill out whatever's missing later. You can also freely respec as you wish, so it's no big deal. So now it's time to choose your artifact tree. Again, you can switch this at any time, and no matter what I say in this video, first and foremost, you should experiment. Play with the buttons, see what hits your vibe best, because some powers may feel more effective in one class or spec over another. You know, it's a game. Hey, play it. I'm going to go through each tree in its entirety to help you understand how the power works as well as the passive traits that go alongside it. Many but not all passives in the different trees can be ranked up to 3 times. Also, many but not all passives can go beyond this limit by equipping up to 2 accessories that also have this power, and we're going to cover that later in the video. We start with Call of the Forest. It's a big line-shaped stampede effect, and it's kind of an all-in-one. Allies hit by this get a mini bloodlust and a damage shield. It also strikes enemies for a modest amount and immobilizes them to help more, I guess, with AoE and cleave damage. It's pretty much an always useful button, but it's also very soft. Like, it's not the thing that'll get you at the top of the meters, but it does look kind of pretty. Souls of the Caw is a passive that procs off abilities and auto-targets enemies that have been tapped. The explosion strikes enemies for damage, and it heals nearby allies in a 5-yard radius. Other similar passives are available in the other trees. This one just happens to look kind of neat. I mean, maybe it'll get a little obnoxious, but it's nice to see like some damage like, oh yeah, okay, I know what that is. High Mountain Fortitude is a very good defensive trait. For 8 seconds, the ability will snapshot all the damage you receive, and then turn 5% of that into a damage absorb that lasts for 4 seconds. It's kind of a must-have for anyone taking up a tanking role or, better yet, an actual tank. The cool thing about this is how it scales and will always be a big contributor to your effective health. Waking Frenzy is an additional buff to Souls of the Caw, but like some abilities, it can't be augmented with items, and you have to take this tree if you want the perk. Now with this, it buffs you and summon companions, which is kind of cool if you have them, so this might be great for hunters or warlocks. Finally, Dreamweaving gives this flashy visual and a buff that gives cooldown reduction and resource generation. Being able to pop this every minute and a half along with using remix time can make for a pretty powerful group buff, but I think more can be added to make it better. This trait doesn't seem to offer a lot of flashy or crazy things, but it's a straightforward mix of damage, healing, and group utility. You just gotta actually aim the major ability and then you're good to go. It's just really unexciting though, and I think the buff Call of the Forest provides should be like stupid crazy. Like make it an actual short version of Bloodlust and have it hit all allies, because otherwise you're gonna end up only hitting yourself and maybe 1 or 2 people. Moving on, we get Twisted Crusade. In my opinion, it's the best all-around tree for dealing damage, and it feels like the one that got the most attention in development so far. For 30 very long seconds, a Dreadlord comes out and lays down AoE bombs onto enemies for massive damage. Now, the thing is the targeting isn't flawless. Like for example, if you're fighting Helya in Maw of Souls, the ability just doesn't work. The Dreadlord can't get close enough to Helya to channel its spell. To me, it's a bug. I hope it gets fixed, and if it doesn't, we can just yell really loud. But still, it basically ends most non-boss encounters by the time it's done casting. Touch of Malice is probably the strongest DPS passive in the remix so far. It's a proc that's basically going off all the time, and what happens is the debuff snapshots all the damage taken over the last 4 seconds, and then boom, it explodes the enemy for AoE damage. What's more, the damage dealt will count towards the next explosion too. The nature of this trait scales, and you can augment this with other gear to have up to 9 points, which can easily make this trait your top damaging ability. If another tree happens to be more your flavor though, you can still use accessories to access 6 ranks of this trait for a big contribution. I Am My Scars is my favorite passive as a tank, but this is also terrific when going solo. Enemies that hit you are guaranteed to be afflicted by a dot that can stack up to 5 times. This applies to any damage taken even at range, which makes this one of the top damage and threat traits a tank can have. Call of the Legion makes it so after your Dreadlord goes away, for the next 30 seconds your crit strikes stack a buff, and every 5 stacks it summons a formidable add to help damage enemies. As minions, the damage is a bit less reliable due to possible movement and travel time, but it's still pretty cool. Finally, as if this wasn't enough, Fell Spike is an ability you can use during Twisting Crusade, ideally at the end, to deal a massive burst of damage. You definitely want to make sure you don't waste that free damage. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense, which is what Twisted Crusade has to offer. Aside from the range issues of the artifact ability, this is the tree to beat for most players interested in high throughput. Moving on, we get Naran's Everdisc, probably the most frustrating out of all the artifact abilities. It shoots out a disc that deals significant damage to enemies. The disc returns to deal additional damage, but you also want to catch it and basically bounce it out again before it goes away. It'll shoot out based on where you're facing when you touch it, and it'll rubber band back one more time. Also on its return trip, it tends to change its angle, so you'll find yourself both chasing it and having to pivot your character quickly to aim it back at the intended target, and then you gotta do it again. This ability is mostly for melee users who don't mind the extra movement and can coordinate their way into aiming and re-aiming the disc each time. Personally, I don't think there's enough payoff to take this, even though it does pretty decent damage when it does connect. Volatile Magics doesn't scale as well as Touch of Malice mentioned earlier, but it's still very strong for classes and specs that favor crit, and also if you happen to itemize your remix gear for high crit. This will also empower the disc ability to always crit, which helps because it's already a pretty powerful nuke. Personally, I think this trait should proc off of every crit, especially because in this build of the remix, we can't easily max out crit anyway. The next node is one of the few choice nodes among the artifact trees. You choose the kind of defensive that suits you best. Arcane Aegis gives a lot of control. It raises an absorb shield while backpedaling. When used right, it can be called upon on the fly, but it'll incur a cooldown when it takes too much damage. Now, I actually think outside the remix, this is a really neat gameplay mechanic that can be included in WoW across the board. It's a way to reduce unavoidable damage with some personal responsibility, but anyway, moving on. Arcane Ward, as the other choice, works best for tanks, I think. It pops a shield after standing still for 4 seconds, but it immediately goes away when moving. Fortunately, whether it's from moving or if the shield is broken, you just need to move a little bit to start the count and get that shield back up. Now, I sort of think that's a bug. I think the shield should start recharging without us having to move, which might sound overpowered, but considering having to stand still anyway, this just feels like a quality of life fix for me. Temporal Retaliation is kind of a follow-up to the previous trait. This reflects damage back to attackers and it debuffs them if they strike the absorb. Now it's great for small arms fire, but this trait also works for all absorb, making this really effective for tanks who stack absorbs, so people like me. But it's kind of questionable. I'm not sure if that's what I really want to do in a remix sort of setting. But later on, if it is possible to stack tons of absorbs and be mostly invulnerable, this trait can be super awesome if not dependent on enemy attack speed. Finally, Arcane Inspiration adds damage absorption to you and allies when you catch the disc, which you should be doing anyway, but like I said, it's a pain. This is kind of a weird trait because it's got the crit trait, which I think is pretty good, but the others are geared towards tanks or melee, and the disc ability is just awkward to use. Again, I don't buy into the payoff for all the extra effort. Personally, I'd like it if they change the ability to always return, but we can guide its path back towards us and smack enemies that way. Kind of like shooting off a divine star that bounces back out a few times, and then otherwise, we could just stand there and it'll feel like a basic nuke. I don't have a problem with that. Next, we have Tempest Wrath. It's on a short cooldown at only 1 minute, and it's pretty straightforward. It's Thunderclap over and over and over again, and it deals more damage when there are lots of enemies. Terror from Below is another kind of nuke, but this has a special synergy with Touch of the Malice up in the Fell tree, dealing additional damage to enemies who have the Fell buff applied to them. In practice, the synergy is very passive and it's just bonus damage. The next trait is another choice note depending on your preference, but both let you move while casting, making this trait a must-have for casters, and fortunately, you can obtain this through gear if you don't care for the tree. Storm Surger is super passive, you just randomly strike nearby enemies for extra damage. Brewing Storm is the thinking man's version. Here you plant and start building up stacks. When you move, you sort of detonate and you deal all the stack damage to enemies. The first one, I say it's way easier to use, and it's also just fun to look at in action. Thunderstruck gives a personal haste and movement speed buff while Tempest Wrath is running, and you should be hitting enemies anyway, so not a big deal. And Churning Waters gives Tempest Wrath another one of those, like do extra work for more payoff kinds of mechanics. While Tempest Wrath is running, you see these faint balls of lightning nearby. You just want to run over them to make the ability last even longer. What's a little tricky is that you risk running a bit too far away sometimes and might end up missing enemies, and you might not be doing other abilities in the meantime. The small problem I have is the balls are kind of hard to see. If they were more prominent, like a little color or brighter glow, I'll have less trouble finding them in the sea of other particle effects. This tree might have a cast while moving perk, but it's geared much more heavily to melee classes thanks to the final trait, and at least it's an easy ability to use with a short cooldown. Last and unfortunately least, we have Vindicator's Judgment. It's my least favorite tree, which is unfortunate as a light-loving paladin. The ability is fine enough. It calls down a beam of light on a targeted enemy and it follows them, so think Fury of a Loon, but, light stuff. What's more, you get this buff called Light Forge, which lasts for 15 seconds and gives bonuses to other traits in this tree, which means you basically have to spec into this tree. Light's Vengeance will randomly proc off abilities and heal you or other targets while dealing damage to enemies. What's more is that this trait is enhanced while being Light Forged. Now, funny enough, this is the only trait on this tree that can also be found on gear. The reason it's funny is that the trait is very weak at the moment, and in its current form, it's not even worth picking up, so hopefully that's just the numbers thing. Flight of the Valkyr turns Vindicator's Judgment into a kind of Ardent Defender buff on up to 5 allies. Let's say you know you're about to take a really big attack that might just kill people. With this, it won't kill you guys, it's just kind of awkward that you have to basically save a DPS cooldown in order to save your friends. And in the context of the remix, I don't see this as a very attractive trait at all, because ideally, we'll eventually reach a state where death isn't much of a risk factor, meaning I won't see the benefit of this trait. So maybe this should be a buff that's up all the time, or instead this gives a really strong throughput buff to affected players, but as is, this thing is just really bad. Zera's Embrace is a buff for you, given a big damage reduction buff, as well as becoming Lightforged to buff the Light's Vengeance procs. Again, like the nature of the remix ought to mean this trait is going to be less and less effective as I get more powerful, so like the previous trait, it feels like I won't see the benefits. And finally, Imperial Orders turns Vindicator's Judgment into multiple abilities when used consecutively, kind of like in the Twisted Crusade tree. The first press is the laser, and that one's fine. The second press is a light-based version of Fell Rush, like you move forward and then you deal more damage. The third press sort of teleports you back again to deal additional damage and healing, and on top of that as a passive, while Lightforge you now spawn these holy balls around the area that you or others can run onto to activate random healing and damage procs, so again, run around for a bit of payoff, and it's just too much honestly. This trait tries to turn you into like a demon hunter sort of thing, and it mostly comes off as awkward. I think left as is, this tree overall is going to be massively unpopular, and it could use an overhaul. The main ability, like I've been saying, it's mostly fine, and Lightforged, maybe it just needs some number tuning. These two traits though, they seem very unattractive compared to what's available on other trees, and should be traits that feel useful like 90% of the time, not only when you're in a lot of trouble. I'm just making examples, but how about a trait that makes all healing done from you also add a damage absorb equal to the same amount to the target, or even more, and it can have multiple ranks and accessories to break that limit further. Lightforged as a buff, that seems okay, so maybe replace this other trait with something that improves the uptime or the potency of this buff. And as for that 3-hit combo, I just don't think that works, and it could be something different entirely. So again, I think the beam is cool, so how about doing something like, if we press the button again, the beam's duration is refreshed back to full, but then it just stops moving. I think that's pretty simple to understand, and it provides some good throughput. I just think that, again, left as is, this tree is going to be the one that gets laughed at, so I hope something's done. Now we need to take a quick look at the different traits that can be found from accessories in the remix, and I'm just going to blast them up all on screen. You can equip 5 additional trait boosters across your accessory slots, so the 2 rings, the 2 trinkets, and 1 neck slot. The quality of gear determines how many stacks of a trait are added, and for simplicity's sake, I'm only going to talk up epic equipment because eventually that's all you'll be seeing and you'll scrap the rest. But there is a limit to how much these traits can be stacked. For example, the High Mountain Fortitude trait only appears on this neck and this ring. And if you happen to spec in the Call of the Forest tree, you can have up to 9 stacks of this buff, which makes for some good tankiness. Of course, and with limitations, you can also mix and match and pick up traits that otherwise aren't a part of your tree. A lot of my testing was spent on the Twisted Crusade tree with this kind of build, so I wanted throughput. I picked up gear to max out both Touch of Malice and I Am My Scars. And I also had 1 piece of gear left, so I opted to pick up High Mountain Fortitude for a bit more tankiness. There is a limit to the optimization due to how some traits inhabit the ring and trinket slots, while others inhabit the neck and either the ring or trinket slot. So as another example, we can get a pretty strong DPS build by speccing into Twisted Crusade, like obviously that's my favorite tree at the moment, and we can max out Touch of Malice and Terror from Below to score that extra synergy. Unfortunately, I'll need to take up Brewing Storm instead of Storm Surger because that trait is only found on the trinket and neck slot, and I only have a free ring slot. So it's one of those ways of introducing choices, but there's still a lot of flexibility. The catch is you'll need to manage all this in your inventory, which will be fairly empty during the remix anyway. You'll be scrapping a lot of stuff, and odds are good we'll see an add-on made to manage these powers just like we did for the MOP remix. Once this goes live and we have a grasp of all the changes and the number tuning, I'll revisit this topic again with some fun builds that I think are worth holding on to. Just like anything else, I'm mostly happy but have some mixed feelings on this whole system. I think there's a build out there that everyone can enjoy, but managing it all through gear swapping and farming, it makes the customization side of things a bit cumbersome. I definitely prefer the MOP Remix gem system because it wasn't coupled to gear. And at a glance, accessories only add stamina and not main stat, so the damage dealing traits, they're not affected by the gear's item level at all. One of the tips I'm likely to give to players in a future guide is if you happen to get a piece of epic quality gear with a trait that you want, so you get the most out of those traits, you want to hold on to that until you find the same thing just at a higher item level for more stamina, and people might end up using like level 40 accessories all the way to max level. Now that's fine, it'll eventually work itself out, it just seems kind of silly. Most of my critical feedback lie with some nitpicking of traits, but I just want to give some special attention back to the Vindicator's Judgment tree. The enhanced ability is really awkward, and the passives are based on conditions antithetical to what the remix is all about, making them very unattractive in the long run. I hope this gets an overhaul before it goes live, and the suggestions I offer, well, I'm just trying to give a jumping off point in delivering something a bit unique to the other trees. So that's my feedback, but only my feedback. And as of this video, there are only a few days left in this second and maybe final trial before the remix goes live, so feel free to check it out and see what you think for yourself. Like this video if it was helpful, subscribe for more WoW coverage, catch me live, and I'll catch you later. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.